They did not announce the silence. That was the clever part. There was no argument, no raised voices, no moment you could point to and say, "That's when it changed." There was no dramatic cutoff, no slammed door, no final message typed in anger and regretted later. Just fewer replies, slower replies. Then none. I noticed it the way you notice a draft in a room you've lived in for decades. Nothing visibly moved. The furniture stayed where it had always been. The walls didn't shift. The temperature was the same. And yet something was wrong. Subtly, persistently. My messages stayed marked as read. My calls went to voicemail with polite timing, not immediate, not ignored outright, just long enough to say, "I saw this. I chose not to engage." That kind of delay is intentional. It's calibrated. It's meant to feel reasonable so that you question yourself instead of the person doing it. At first, I assumed it was life, work deadlines, stress, schedules colliding, children growing into their own gravity. I told myself this was normal. I told myself not to become that father who counts hours between texts like they are owed interest. I told myself I had raised them better than that, and, more importantly, I had raised myself better than that. So I waited. And while I waited, the silence learned my shape. It adjusted around me. It found the edges of my days. It learned when I woke up, when I usually called, when I tended to check in, and then it pressed there. Not aggressively, just enough. Then the seating changed. It was my daughter's graduation dinner, a private room at a restaurant that wanted to look understated while charging too much for everything. Long table, white cloth, name cards printed on thick paper with a font that tries very hard to look important. I arrived early. I always arrive early. That is how I was raised, and how I raised them. The room was quiet when I stepped in. Chairs still pushed in, glasses already placed, the faint smell of polish and lemon cleaner. I walked the length of the table, reading names as I went, smiling at familiar ones. When I found my card, it wasn't in the center. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't shoved into a corner like an afterthought. That would have been obvious. That would have invited a question. No, it was simply reduced, placed near the end, technically part of the table, socially peripheral. My son sat near the middle with his wife. My daughter was across from him with her husband. Around them were people I recognized, colleagues, mentors, donors, friends of friends. The gravitational center of the room had shifted, and I was no longer in it. My seat was beside a man I had never met, a donor, someone who had written a check, smiled for photos, and earned proximity. No one explained it. No one needed to. Explanation is only required when you think the other person has standing. I sat down. I smiled. I congratulated my daughter and meant it. I listened while stories were told about struggles I had quietly funded, about risks I had underwritten, about support I had provided without conditions, all now reframed as personal courage, individual grit, independent triumph. I nodded at the right moments. I laughed when others laughed. I drank water slowly. I watched hands move as people spoke. I watched glances pass over me like I was part of the furniture. Useful once, solid, no longer interactive. The silence wasn't loud. It was procedural. At the end of the night, my daughter hugged me quickly, a practiced, efficient gesture. Her husband shook my hand the way you shake a coworker's, polite, firm, disengaged. My son clapped me on the shoulder and said, "We'll catch up soon." Soon is a word that means nothing when spoken that way. I went home and didn't say anything to my wife. Not yet. Before we continue, hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We'd love to get to know our audience better. The next month was a rehearsal. Not the performance, just the practice run. The phase where everyone tests how far something can go without resistance. Group messages stopped, including me. Not all at once. Gradually. First, a missed reply. then a thread I only learned about later. Then entire plans that were already finished by the time they were mentioned. I learned about things after they happened, framed as anecdotes. You should have been there. You would have liked it. Would have. That tense carries weight. It assumes exclusion as a fact already accepted by everyone in the room. I was invited to my son's house for dinner. A single message. Polite, sparse, no follow-up. When I arrived, there were already plates on the table. That detail matters. It told me I was not part of the timing, only the attendance. My seat was at the corner. Again, not bad seating, just lesser seating, the kind you give someone when you don't want to be accused of pushing them out entirely. Conversation flowed around me, not through me. Topics changed mid-sentence when I leaned in. My son deferred to his wife when questions were asked. My daughter spoke to her brother through spouses, like a diplomatic channel. At one point, my son's wife laughed lightly and said, "Well, times change." She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at my wife, like she was delivering news. After dinner, I wandered into the garage. I hadn't planned to. My feet took me there on their own. Muscle memory, habit, ownership without paperwork. I had built the shelving years earlier, cut the wood myself, measured twice, adjusted when things didn't line up perfectly. It was still solid, still holding weight. But my tools were gone, not missing, replaced, newer ones, better brands, arranged differently, clean, intentional, someone else's system. My son appeared in the doorway, leaning casually with his arms crossed. "We reorganized," he said. "Hope that's okay." There it was. Not a question, a statement with a smile attached. I nodded. I said nothing. Inside, I counted. Not the tools, the tone, the assumption, the quiet understanding that permission was no longer required. That night, my wife asked, "Are you okay?" I said, of course, that was a lie. But not the kind people think. I wasn't hurt. I was alert. I began an inventory, not of assets. That would have been obvious. Emotional, reactive. This was quieter. I inventoried dependencies. Who relied on what? Who signed which document? Who had access versus authority? Who assumed permanence because they had never been tested? I did this in places no one thought about anymore. In the garage late at night with the door closed. In the storage unit I still paid for because no one had ever asked me why I kept it. In the old office downtown, the one with outdated furniture and slow elevators, written off as irrelevant because it didn't photograph well. I found things, not secrets, not crimes, structures. Timing clauses buried in language everyone had skimmed. Consent requirements no one remembered agreeing to. Emergency authority that had never been revoked because no one thought to challenge it. Power doesn't disappear. It just waits. I called an old contact. Not a friend, a professional. Someone who understood process and didn't ask why. I didn't frame it as conflict. I framed it as clarification. He confirmed what I suspected. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. Just leverage that only exists if you know it exists. At home, my wife watched me. She didn't interrupt. She never does when she knows interruption would be noise. She has always been smarter than people assume. Smarter than they ever gave her credit for. Smarter than even our children realized. When I finally told her what I was doing, she didn't ask me to stop. She said, "Just be sure." I said, "I am." And I was. I checked everything twice. I checked my emotions last. They invited me to a meeting. Neutral ground. A cafe that pretends to be relaxed while charging too much for coffee. Exposed brick. Soft lighting. The kind of place where people talk about important things without ever raising their voices. My son arrived late. My daughter didn't order anything. Her husband checked his phone every 30 seconds like he was waiting for permission to leave. They spoke carefully. Soft concern, gentle phrasing. "We want to make sure you feel included." Included. As if inclusion were a courtesy they extended, not a condition they depended on. At one point, my son leaned forward and said, "Maybe it would help if you stepped back a bit." Let us handle things. You've done enough. Done enough. That phrase lands differently when spoken by someone who has never done the accounting. I nodded. I agreed. I said I understood. I said I trusted them. That last part surprised them. I saw it in the pause, the way shoulders relaxed, the way breath released. They thought the silence had worked. That distance had trained me. When we stood to leave, my daughter's husband blocked my path for a second too long. Not aggressive, just territorial. I smiled at him. He didn't smile back. Outside, my wife asked, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm done explaining." The network woke up slowly, not all at once. That would have drawn attention. That would have felt reactive. Instead, it stirred the way something long dormant does when conditions change. Old numbers, old contacts, people I hadn't spoken to in years, not because of conflict, but because nothing had required it. Relationships that had settled into the background of my life, stable and unused. They weren't favors. Favors implied debt. These were understandings. I didn't rush. I didn't confront anyone. I let the silence continue. But now it was mine too. I answered fewer messages. I declined vague invitations. I stopped filling gaps. Meanwhile, my children became louder. Public posts, casual jokes, light commentary about generational shifts, about outdated thinking, about doing things their way now. Nothing cruel. Nothing that could be quoted without sounding petty, just dismissive enough to invite agreement. I watched without reacting. I saved nothing. I didn't need screenshots or evidence. This wasn't about proving intent. It was about timing. The first crack appeared at a public event I didn't attend. A panel, a fundraiser, the kind of room where responsibility circulates invisibly until someone drops it. A question was asked that no one expected. A logistical detail, a procedural issue. Someone said my name, not as an accusation, as a reflex. The room stalled. No one knew who was supposed to answer. Later that night, my son called me, angry, confused, accusatory. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message once, then deleted it. Outside, the weather changed. A storm rolled in without warning, wind first, then rain, the kind that arrives fully formed, without easing in. I stood on the porch and let the wind hit my face. They thought ignoring me would make me desperate. It made me careful. The first time it turned physical, it was clumsy. My son showed up at the old office unannounced. He still knew the address. Muscle memory doesn't fade as quickly as authority does. He pushed through the door like he owned the air inside it, like proximity alone still meant something. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded. His voice was already raised, already searching for someone else to blame. I stayed seated. I didn't offer him a chair. That mattered more than it should have. I asked if he wanted coffee. He said no. He paced instead. Fast steps, tight turns, talking faster than his thoughts. He accused me of embarrassing him, of undermining him in front of people who mattered, of crossing a line. I let him talk. I waited until his words lost shape, until repetition replaced argument, until his voice cracked on a sentence he didn't finish. Then I said, calmly, that I hadn't done anything. Not yet. That was when he grabbed the edge of the desk, not to flip it, not to threaten, just to feel something solid, something that didn't move away from him. "You think you're smarter than us now," he said. I smiled. That made it worse. He stepped closer. Too close. I stood. He didn't move out of the doorway, not intentionally, just reflex, territory again. I didn't touch him. I didn't need to. I said his name once, quietly, the way I used to when he was young and about to do something foolish. There was a knock at the door. A tenant from down the hall, wrong time, right person. My son stepped back. He left without another word. I locked the door behind him and sat down again. My hands were steady. The chase happened 2 days later, though I didn't think of it as a chase at the time. It felt more like an interruption, an inconvenience that arrived on schedule, like everything else he did. I had just left a meeting downtown. Nothing dramatic. A conference room with bad lighting, lukewarm coffee, and people who spoke in bullet points because it made them feel efficient. I shook hands, exchanged the right pleasantries, walked out with my jacket over my arm, and stepped into the afternoon noise of the city. Horns, footsteps, the smell of food carts and hot pavement. The kind of day that looks neutral from a distance but grinds you down if you stay in it too long. I didn't see him at first. I felt him. There's a pressure that comes with being watched. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind you feel in your spine. It's quieter than that. A distortion. Like when you're driving and the radio signal slips just enough to irritate you. I checked my mirrors out of habit, more than concern. Rear view. Side mirror. Again. There he was, my daughter's husband. 2 cars back, then 1. He followed me in his car. I noticed because he's bad at it. Always has been. He thinks proximity equals control. That if he stays close enough, if he fills your peripheral vision, you'll behave the way he wants. He doesn't understand space. He doesn't understand patience. He mistakes motion for momentum. He stayed too close, braked too late, telegraphed every move. Every lane change came a second after mine. Every stop was exaggerated. Too fast on the gas, too hard on the brake. He was announcing himself without realizing it, like a man clearing his throat before every sentence. I could have lost him easily. Downtown traffic makes it simple. One unexpected turn, one slow roll through a yellow light, 1 block longer than necessary, but I didn't. I let him follow. Part of me wanted to confirm something, not about him, about myself. I wanted to see if the calm would hold when it was tested, whether I would react or observe, whether the distance I'd built over the last few months was structural or cosmetic. Traffic thinned as I moved away from the center. Office towers gave way to older buildings. Brick, glass with hairline cracks. Storefronts that hadn't changed their signs since the city decided pretending nothing had happened was a strategy. I changed direction deliberately. Streets I knew better. Turns that required commitment. The kind of turns you can't undo halfway through without looking foolish. I headed toward areas he avoided because they weren't predictable. Places without valet stands or polished sidewalks. Construction zones where the lanes shifted every week. Narrow roads that punished hesitation, temporary signage zip-tied to bent poles, unmarked detours that rewarded familiarity and punished assumption. He followed anyway. At a red light, he pulled alongside me, window down, shouting, demanding I pull over. I didn't look at him at first. I kept my eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel. The light glowed red like it was thinking about something important. His voice cut through the intersection, sharp and thin, trying to borrow authority from volume. "Pull over," he shouted. "We need to talk." I could hear the strain in it, the effort it took him to sound in charge. I wondered briefly how often he spoke like that at home, how often he mistook urgency for importance. I didn't respond. When the light changed, I turned sharply into a service road that ran behind a row of warehouses. The kind of turn that only works if you've already decided. No signal, no apology, just motion. He hesitated. That half-second told me everything I needed to know. Then he followed. The service road narrowed almost immediately. Cracked asphalt, faded lines, a place designed for function, not comfort. Delivery trucks lined the curb, engines idling, their drivers eating sandwiches or staring at their phones. One pulled out slowly behind me, another rolled forward ahead. The space collapsed without drama, the way it always does when no one is trying to be dramatic. Delivery trucks boxed us in from both ends, engines idling, no space to maneuver. I stopped. Put the car in park, let the engine run. He stopped too, though harder than necessary. For a moment, nothing happened. The air felt suspended, the kind of pause that invites bad decisions. Then he got out of his car. I stayed inside mine. I watched him in the side mirror as he walked toward me, jaw tight, shoulders lifted like he was bracing against weather that didn't exist. He was performing anger, hoping it would carry him somewhere. His shoes scuffed against the pavement. He didn't notice the drivers watching, didn't notice the phones already coming out, lenses angled with casual interest. He banged on my window. His reflection shook in the glass, distorted and frantic. "Open the door!" he shouted. "You don't get to do this!" The words tumbled over each other. Accusations without structure, demands without leverage. I looked at him then. Really looked. Through the glass, through the reflection of my own face layered over his. He looked smaller, up close. Not physically, conceptually. Like someone who had mistaken a hallway for a stage. People stared. Phones came out. Someone laughed nervously from the sidewalk, the sound sharp and embarrassed, like they'd surprised themselves. He realized too late what he looked like. You could see the calculation happen, the sudden awareness of context, of witnesses, of how easily control turns into spectacle when it's not agreed upon. He stepped back, ran a hand through his hair, looked around as if searching for an exit that didn't require retreat. Then he got in his car. The truck in front of him moved. The one behind me did the same. The space reopened like nothing had happened. Traffic absorbed the moment without comment. It always does. He drove off without looking at me again. I waited a few seconds before pulling out. Long enough to let the rhythm reset. Long enough to make sure my hands were still steady. That night, my daughter called me. It was late. Late enough that the call felt intentional. She knew I would answer. She knew I wouldn't pretend to be asleep. Her voice was already breaking when I picked up, crying, but not the kind that asks for comfort, the kind that demands resolution. She didn't apologize. She accused. She said I was humiliating her, that I was tearing the family apart, that I knew exactly what I was doing. She talked in circles, returning to the same phrases like they were anchors. Humiliation, disrespect, public embarrassment. She framed everything in terms of optics, as if the worst thing that had happened was that someone might have seen something they weren't supposed to. I listened. I could hear his voice in the background once, low, urgent, coaching. I said very little. Not because I didn't have answers, but because answers weren't what she wanted. She wanted me to absorb the blame so she could stop carrying it. When she paused, waiting for me to defend myself, I told her I was tired. It wasn't a strategy. It was the truth. I told her we could talk when things were calmer, when there was less noise attached to every sentence. She said there would never be a calm time if I kept doing this, if I kept provoking him, if I kept pretending I didn't understand. I told her I understood more than she thought. That was when she hung up. The line went quiet without ceremony. No dramatic goodbye. Just absence. I sat there for a while after. The apartment was dark except for the lamp near the window. The city hummed the way it always does at night, steady and indifferent. I thought about the meeting from earlier that day, about the trucks, about the way his face had changed when he realized he was being watched. Mostly, I thought about how none of it had surprised me. I went to bed without replaying the conversation, without drafting responses I would never send. My body felt heavier in a way that wasn't unpleasant, like something had finally settled into place. I slept well. They thought they had fixed it. That was the part I found most revealing. Not the apology itself, but the confidence with which they delivered it. As if conflict were a loose screw you could tighten with the right words and a public-facing tone. It appeared online first, a statement posted at a convenient hour when engagement would be high, but scrutiny would be low. Carefully worded. Passive voice doing most of the heavy lifting. Shared responsibility spread so thin it meant nothing at all. Vague acknowledgments of misunderstanding, of emotions running high, of intentions being misread. No specifics, No ownership, just enough language to imply maturity. Enough for their circle to nod and move on. Friends commented with hearts and phrases like growth and healing. People who hadn't been there, who hadn't asked questions, who preferred conclusions to processes. The statement wasn't meant for me. It was meant to close the loop for everyone else, to give them permission to stop thinking about it. They even invited me to a gathering. A reset, they called it. The message was upbeat, almost cheerful, an offer wrapped in optimism, as if extending the invitation itself were proof of good faith. Come by, share a drink, put this behind us. Let's be normal again. I read it once, then again, slower. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. I declined, briefly, politely, without explanation. Behind the scenes, doors were closing, quietly, not slammed, not locked, just no longer opening when they tried them. Emails went unanswered. Calls were routed differently. Requests that once received immediate attention were acknowledged with automated replies, or not at all. Processes they assumed were permanent revealed their dependency on consent, on participation, on access that could be withdrawn without ceremony. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the point. The system didn't react. It adjusted. My wife came with me to one final appointment. She didn't have to. She chose to. The building sat on the edge of a district most people pass through without noticing, an administrative structure from another decade, functional, anonymous. Its exterior was concrete and glass dulled by time, the kind of architecture that never aspired to impress. Inside, it smelled like old carpet and coffee, not fresh coffee, the kind that's been reheated more times than anyone will admit. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a flat, forgiving glow. Beige walls interrupted occasionally by outdated notices in plastic frames. The kind of place where decisions are made without drama, because drama would only slow things down. We checked in at a counter staffed by someone who had mastered neutrality, names, identification. A clipboard slid across the surface, pens tethered by thin chains. The routine was familiar, comforting in its predictability. We were called back after a short wait. The office was small but orderly. Filing cabinets lined one wall, a desk cleared of anything personal. No photographs, no decorations, just tools for work. The woman who sat across from us spoke clearly and took notes without judgment. Her tone was steady, her questions precise. She explained the process, what this meant, what it didn't, where the lines were drawn and which ones could not be crossed later. We signed, we confirmed, we waited. There was a moment after the final signature when nothing happened. No bells, no sense of completion. Just a pause while she reviewed the paperwork, scanning for errors, checking boxes against a checklist we would never see. When it was done, she looked up and said, "Once this is processed, there is no reversal." Her voice carried no warning, just fact. I said, "I understand." I did understand. More than she could know, more than anyone on the outside could guess. Outside, the air felt different, not lighter, just clearer. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that presses everything into the same tone. Cars moved through the parking lot in orderly lines. Somewhere, a door closed with a soft echo. My wife took my hand, not to stop me, to ground me. Her grip was firm, familiar, a reminder of weight and presence, of choice. "They're going to come hard now," she said. It wasn't fear in her voice, it was assessment. I nodded. We stood there a moment longer than necessary. Then we walked to the car. They came hard, not strategically, not carefully, emotionally. I felt it before I saw them. A pressure in the air, the kind that presses against your chest before a storm breaks. Tires on gravel that didn't bother slowing down. Doors opening and closing too fast. Voices already climbing over one another, sharp and uneven, like they had rehearsed the argument separately, and decided to perform it all at once. My son first, always him first. He moved like he was already late for being angry. My daughter close behind, face tight, eyes bright in a way that meant tears were already burning somewhere behind them. Their spouses followed, half a step back, positioned just right to look supportive without taking responsibility. A formation I recognized immediately. They had learned it from meetings, from negotiations, from rooms where outcomes were decided before anyone admitted that was what was happening. I stayed inside longer than they expected. I watched through the narrow side window by the door, the one that catches the driveway but hides the interior. They didn't know I could see them from there. That mattered too. They paced. My son gestured with his hands, wide, exaggerated, as if the house itself were the audience. My daughter folded her arms, unfolded them, pressed her fingers into her sleeves like she was trying to hold herself together from the outside. One spouse checked a phone, then slipped it back into a pocket when they noticed the neighbor's porch light flick on across the street. I let them wait. Then I opened the door. I stepped onto the porch and closed it behind me. The sound was deliberate, solid, final. The click of the latch settling into place wasn't loud, but it carried. It told them something without me having to say it. It said this conversation would not spill into my house. It said I would not be surrounded. It said whatever happened next would happen in the open, where words had consequences and witnesses existed. That mattered. My wife stayed inside. I didn't turn to look, but I could feel her presence the way you feel the temperature change when a cloud crosses the sun, watching, listening, ready to step in if it became necessary, choosing not to yet. We had not discussed this. We didn't need to. She understood boundaries even when others pretended not to see them. They didn't greet me. No hello, no pause, no attempt at normalcy. They accused. "You did this on purpose," my daughter said, the words coming out fast, already shaking. Her voice cracked on the last word like it surprised her by existing. "You blindsided us," my son added immediately, stepping forward as if volume were proof. "You humiliated us." Their spouses nodded, not emphatically, just enough to be counted, just enough to say we are together in this. I stood still, hands at my sides, feet planted evenly. Neutral posture. The kind you learn when you've spent years in rooms where reacting first means losing ground. The kind that frustrates people who came expecting a fight. "I didn't do anything illegal," I said. The word landed harder than I expected. It always does. It shifted the conversation whether they wanted it to or not. It dragged the argument out of the emotional and into something colder, sharper. You could see it in their faces, the way their anger had to take a step around it instead of charging straight through. My son's jaw tightened. He took a step closer, too close. Close enough that I could smell the familiar mix of cologne and impatience he'd worn since his 20s. He shoved me. Not hard, not enough to knock me back. Just enough to make a point. A hand to my chest, a push meant to test the line. Meant to remind me of size and proximity and history, meant to say you're still my father, but don't forget I'm not small anymore. I took one step back. I didn't stumble. I didn't brace. I just let the step happen. Let gravity do its work. He stepped forward again. I raised my voice for the first time in months. Touch me again, and this becomes something you can't walk away from. The words came out calm, level, no shouting, no threat layered with heat. That was what stopped him, not fear, recognition, the sudden understanding that I wasn't bluffing and wasn't performing, that I wasn't trying to win the moment, only to define it. He froze. Silence stretched between us, thin and uncomfortable, the kind that draws attention whether you want it or not. Across the street, someone pretended to adjust a curtain. Down the block, a car slowed more than necessary. They recovered by talking. They demanded explanations, reversals, time, grace. They spoke over one another again, voices climbing, circling the same points. That it was unfair, that it was sudden, that it could have been handled privately, that there were reputations involved, that people were asking questions, that things had been set in motion that couldn't just be undone. They offered compromises they no longer had the authority to offer. "We can smooth this out," my son said, like smoothing meant erasing. "Let's just pause," my daughter said. Like pause meant return to before. "We can talk to people," one spouse offered, already framing the damage as public relations. They spoke as if momentum still favored them, as if pressure alone could bend reality back into the shape they preferred, as if I were still the man who absorbed discomfort to keep gatherings peaceful, as if silence on my part had been weakness instead of observation. I let them talk. I let the words pile up until they started repeating themselves, until the energy that had brought them here began to burn unevenly. Then I told them the truth, not all at once, not as a speech, as statements, measured, separate, each one given space to exist. "The silence taught me everything I needed to know," I said. My daughter shook her head immediately, already rejecting the premise. "Being ignored showed me exactly how expendable I was to you once you believed you had replaced me." My son opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have a ready response for that. None of them did. "I watched you grow comfortable without me," I continued, confident that I would remain quietly available, present, but irrelevant. Their faces changed as the words settled. Not guilt, not yet. Something closer to offense, as if I had violated an agreement they didn't remember making, but fully expected me to honor. "We were busy," my daughter said. "You know that." "I do," I said. "That was the lesson." She made a sound then, not a word, not language, just sound, raw and uncontrolled, torn straight out of her chest. It startled even her. She covered her mouth too late, eyes wide, furious that her body had betrayed her before her argument could. My son turned away and kicked the fence, not enough to break it, just enough to hurt his foot, just enough to feel something give that wasn't his pride. Neighbors had stopped pretending not to watch. Porch lights came on one by one, not coordinated, just inevitable. Curtains shifted. A dog barked somewhere down the street, feeding off the tension like it always does. The scene had spilled beyond us now, beyond family, beyond control. That was my cue. I walked past them without another word. I didn't brush against them. I didn't look at them. I didn't hurry. I crossed the small distance back to the door, opened it, stepped inside, and locked it behind me. I leaned against the door. On the other side, the noise continued for a few moments, raised voices muffled by wood and glass. A sharp knock that came too late to matter. My daughter calling my name once, softer than before, then stopping herself as if remembering who she was supposed to be in this moment. Gradually, the sounds thinned. Footsteps on gravel. A car door slamming harder than necessary. An engine starting, revving, then settling into idle. Another door, another engine. Tires pulling away too fast again. When it was quiet, it stayed quiet. My wife stood a few feet away, arms folded loosely, watching me the way she always had when she was waiting for me to decide whether something was over. "They wanted you to fix it," she said finally. "I know. They still think you will." I exhaled slowly. The kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding until your ribs start to ache. "They'll learn," I said. I pushed myself off the door and walked deeper into the house. The lights were warm, familiar, unchanged. Everything inside was exactly where I had left it, and for the first time in a long while, that felt less like stagnation and more like stability. Outside, somewhere down the street, another porch light clicked off. I did not follow it with my eyes. The final confrontation had to be public. Not for spectacle, for structure. Private arguments collapse into emotion. They loop, they distort. Everyone remembers a different version of what was said, what was promised, what was meant. Public settings do something else. They force order. They require records. They introduce gravity. Words spoken there don't dissolve when the door closes. They stay. That was the point. They tried one last move, a formal meeting, carefully arranged, calendars aligned, an authority figure invited to preside, someone with a title that suggested neutrality, and a resume that implied control. A room chosen not for comfort, but for symbolism. Long table, neutral walls, glass panels that let in light without warmth. The kind of place where decisions are supposed to feel inevitable once enough serious people agree to them. They believed pressure would force compromise. They believed proximity to power still worked the way it always had. That if they stood close enough to it, spoke its language, nodded at the right moments, reality would bend back into something manageable. That I would feel small again, in a room designed to make individuals feel temporary. I arrived early. Not dramatically early. Just early enough to be unremarkable. Early enough to choose my seat. I didn't sit at the head of the table. I didn't sit across from them. I chose a chair slightly off-center, angled just enough that I could see everyone without being framed as oppositional. It wasn't accidental. I had learned long ago that positioning shapes perception before anyone opens their mouth. I sat quietly. I didn't review notes. I didn't check my phone. I watched the door. When they entered, they came together. Not staggered, not casual, unified by panic more than strategy. The unity was brittle. You could see it in the way they matched their pace too deliberately, in the way one spouse glanced at another as if silently asking, "Are we still aligned?" My son avoided my eyes entirely. He fixed his gaze on the table, on the chairs, on anything that wasn't me. My daughter stared straight at me, unblinking, like I had become something unfamiliar that needed to be identified before it could be handled. The authority figure entered last. Calm, neutral, professional. He shook hands, introduced himself again, even though we had already exchanged emails. He had the practiced tone of someone who believes structure can contain any conflict if it's applied firmly enough. The agenda was read. Item 1, purpose of the meeting. Item 2, statements from involved parties. Item 3, path forward. Polite introductions followed, each person summarizing their role, their stake, their desire for resolution. The language was careful. No accusations, no ownership. Everything framed as concern, misunderstanding, unintended consequences. A framing statement about moving forward was offered, about repairing trust, about restoring cooperation, about minimizing disruption. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't nod. I didn't react. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't stand right away. I let the silence stretch. Not long enough to be rude, just long enough to be felt. Long enough that the authority figure shifted slightly in his chair. Long enough that my daughter's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Long enough to establish that I was not being rushed. Then I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lower it either. I spoke the way you speak when you know the record will survive the meeting. I laid out the sequence, not emotionally, not defensively, procedurally. Dates, specific, verifiable, clauses, cited exactly, dependencies, clearly defined, consent requirements, explicit, expiration windows, already closed. I explained how the structures they relied on were built, not as favors, not as gestures of goodwill, as systems that had always required my approval even when they pretended not to notice it. I explained how that approval had not been revoked dramatically, not announced, not weaponized, simply withdrawn, quietly, legally, correctly. I explained the difference between access and authority, how access can be borrowed, inherited, assumed, how authority must be granted and can be rescinded, how the two are often confused by people who have never had to distinguish between them. Faces around the table began to change, brows furrowed, Pens paused mid-note. Someone leaned back, re-evaluating. Whispers started, subtle at first, then more pointed. Questions passed quietly from one ear to another. My daughter stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound cutting through the room like a tear in fabric. She pointed at me, her hand shaking, her voice breaking through whatever composure she had been holding together. "You betrayed us!" she shouted. "You planned this! You wanted to punish us!" The word hung there. Punish. It was the word she needed to believe. I didn't raise my voice in response. I didn't match her volume. I didn't correct her framing directly. I looked at her, really looked. And I asked one question. "When was the last time you asked how I was?" The room stopped breathing. She opened her mouth immediately, ready to answer, ready to defend herself, ready to redirect. Nothing came out. Her face shifted, confusion sliding into realization too quickly to stop. Her mouth closed. She swallowed. She tried again. Still nothing. The silence that followed was not tense. It was clarifying. The authority figure cleared his throat, carefully, professionally. He confirmed what I had said, every point, every requirement, every consequence. He did not soften it. He did not dramatize it. No loopholes, no delays, no alternative interpretations. My son lunged forward. It was instinctive, emotional, a body reacting before the mind could stop it. Security stepped in immediately, hands on shoulders, firm, controlled, final. They didn't shove him back, they didn't escalate. They simply removed momentum from the situation the way trained people do. I didn't move, I didn't flinch, I didn't step away. I looked at both of them. "You thought ignoring me would make me desperate," I said. I paused long enough for the sentence to land. It made me careful. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, chairs shifted. Someone called for order, someone else called for a break. None of it mattered anymore. The structure had done its work. I turned and walked out. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't gather my things slowly. I didn't look back. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt definitive without being dramatic. In the hallway, the air felt lighter. Not victorious, not relieved, just clear. Outside, the day continued. People passed. Conversations resumed. Nothing about the world had changed, except the part that had needed to. I walked away without hesitation. For the first time, I didn't feel watched.